if someone listening is thinking, I can't take time away from anything in my life for my grief because of my societal conditioning, this is your wake up call that you do get to, and you still are valuable even when you enter into states of non productivity.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you decided to start there because I think there's particularly in a capitalist society, it's a radical act to buy back some of our own time in whatever way we're able to do that, especially to give ourselves something. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Full-Time Grievers. I'm glad to be back here with you, Selysa.
Yes, glad to be here with you also.
This week we're going to be talking about a concept and practice around grieving and giving ourselves time to do it. We're calling it Grieve Leave, based on the work of Rebecca Finegloss, who founded the organization Grieve Leave after she spent a year consciously attending her own grief, traveling and blogging about her experience. And so now she hosts this community for us fellow grievers and advocating for us to give ourselves time, space, and permission to attend to our grief. And so today we wanted to spend a little time talking about this concept of grief leave. Where would you like to start, Selysa?
I think I want to start by giving every listener permission to take the space that they need. We live in such a busy, productivity based society, and there's often no space for even this conversation to happen, let alone for the space to take the grief leave at all. And so if someone listening is thinking, I can't take time away from anything in my life for my grief because of my societal conditioning, this is your wake up call that you do get to, and you still are valuable even when you enter into states of non productivity.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I'm so glad you decided to start there because I think there's particularly in a capitalist society, it's a radical act to buy back some of our own time in whatever way we're able to do that, especially to give ourselves something. It's one thing if we're like going to go volunteer at the soup kitchen, or we're going to go help a neighbor, or we're going to go, I don't know, do some other work, not our normal work. But it's really like it emphasizes the radicalness of the act if it's to turn toward ourselves and to support ourselves with something that we have going on, like grief. So yeah, I really do think if you get nothing else out of this episode, please allow us to afford you the superpower to give yourself the permission to take care of yourself, to take care of your body, to you know not call people back if that's where you are with it, not do dishes, not make decisions that it's not right for you to make right then, to treat yourself as though you are in a period of triage and you're the patient, you're the one that needs the care.
And I think that for so many people, there's the conditioning around hyperproductivity has led to so much shame and guilt around spending time unproductive. And I know for me, that was really, really challenging to unpack because when I have needed to take grieve leaves, it's it's not really a choice. It honestly is a disability to be going through really intense acute grief. So I had to work through the shame around that in order to be okay with myself and be okay with being myself. And one way that I did that was I love to set my affirmations as my phone screensaver. So I had this photo from the desert, and I just kind of consider the desert to be a really unproductive place. And this was specifically salt flats in the desert.
Wow.
I think the only life out there is microorganisms
Hmm.
in the ground,
Yeah.
but really there's no life supported here. So I took an image from a trip I had taken in the past to some salt flats in the desert, and I put the text over the image. Regardless of productivity, I am valuable to my family, community, myself, and the universe. And when I write my affirmations, I write them because I do not believe them. And I'm trying to convince myself that it's true, which is why I set it as my phone screensaver. So I read that every single day, probably 50 times a day as my phone screensaver. And then after several months of that, it started to become true. I started to believe it. So working with our conditioning is a slow process like that.
Yeah. I appreciate you touching on that because I think regardless of where we're brought up or the kind of conditioning we have, pretty much every single one of us is going to have some kind of conditioning come up that is in opposition to us allowing ourselves to have the grief or to let it out.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, being prepared to tend to those parts of us that kind of object, like, oh, you really need to get back to, or you really have to, or you forgot to call, or you gotta, I definitely remember a lot of that from my own, especially early days where, like you're saying, there's an incapacitation that we have to kind of surrender to a little bit. Some of us, maybe we have a little bit more wherewithal and so we can kind of suppress it or repress it a little bit more. But others of us, like, we're just raw. And so we sort of can't attend to things as we might normally. Even in that space, there can be those echoes of you really need to get up, or you really got to get back to work, or you can't just lay here all day. What are you doing? Right. So knowing that some of that resistance or friction is going to come up is really so useful and important for us to work with. I want to like sort of tag off that too, because our cultural conditioning or even family conditioning can invite us to have opposition to giving ourselves time, but also like for some of us, the cost of having that time back for ourselves is too high for our financial situation, right? We can't,
Mm-hmm.
we see ourselves as not being able to afford to take time off from work or slow down or not be as on or not be as productive in any way, right?
And what's fascinating about that is that that's so tied to survival, right? So not being able to afford the grieve leave because you need your job to keep paying your bills, to keep having a roof over your head and food to go into your mouth is, in a sense, being in a survival state.
Yeah. And not just like internally in survival mode, but in an environment that requires survival reactivity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. I, gosh, I really like that you went there with it because that's a consideration that many of us might not arrive at, but also can really compound the experience, right? Like we have to go to work, so we don't have the time that we need. So we go to work and we produce, we put out, that's taxing to us energetically. We get home, we don't have enough time for our grief before we need to, I don't know, take care of our kids or get ready to be able to go to work the next day. And so it can compound the experience of the expansiveness of the experience of the grief, even as we're like simultaneously trying to hold it back and hold it down. We're having to put out at such a level of energy and not being able to resource ourselves enough that by itself adds to the reactivity, adds to the pain, adds to the weight of the experience of the grieving that we're doing anyway, or grieving that we're trying to suppress.
Yeah.
So it can really throw someone for a loop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And being in that survival response is going to very naturally lead to compartmentalization. Compartmentalization is a really valuable survival skill of saying, I don't have capacity for this right now. I'm trying to survive. I'm going to put it on the shelf in the back of my brain, which just helps the grief to wait for you later.
Yeah.
So sometimes if
That's,
you're in that survival state and you're not grieving, that's what's happening.
yeah. Yeah. And that compartmentalization can be really useful in the short term to,
Mm-hmm.
when we do have to focus on work, or we do have to take care of our kids, or we do have to do other things. And like you're saying, it's a storage kind of facility. It only has so much room, and we can only put so much in there before it starts tumbling back out. Right.
Yes.
So, yeah, the conditions that we have can invite us to have the sense that we just don't have enough time to grieve. And for many of us, we are working at such a level, and we are caring for others at such a level, and we are tending to other things that need to happen in our lives at such a level that the number of hours or minutes in a day that we have to give over to our grieving can be pretty small. And at the same time, probably not as non-existent as we can begin to tell ourselves, right? If we're in that state of having to work, having to put out, having to keep producing, it can be easy to say, I just don't have time for that. I can't go into it. Or to kind of like keep the blinders on.
Yeah, so there's a balance there between reality and perceived reality. So reality is I only have 30 minutes to attend to my emotional state every day, whereas perceived reality is I have absolutely no time to attend to my personal self every single day because I am so busy. But then in there are always, or I don't like to use the word always, but there are almost always micro moments. 5 seconds after you park the car before you get out. 1 minute after you're at the end of your shower where you can close your eyes and feel. There are micro moments that almost everyone probably has. And if you're listening and you're like, no, I don't have it, let us know because I'm curious what situations lead to that,
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
having genuinely zero micro moments.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if when we begin to look for them, we can really, sort of engineer even little tiny increments like you're talking about, which I think are really useful. Even like every time we go to the bathroom is generally a private moment where we could turn inward a little bit. And I want to talk about that for a second because many of us, especially earlier in our grieving process, especially when it's really acute, tend to think, or even have the experience, when I open it up, it's hard to tuck it back away after the minute or two, and especially earlier on, that can be just such a common experience so many of us have. But as we continue working with it, as we continue on, integrating the loss over time, I know you found, lots of us find that there can be these just like really poignant moments that we allow, and we don't have to, or we don't even find ourselves like in danger of like falling into it for a whole day. And I think it can be a little bit of a challenge to gauge. Like, I'm actually in a place in my grieving now where, yeah, I could listen to that song and I could let out some tears on the way to work and then be ready to go into work by the time I get there. Right? It can sort of have us think, if I open up to it, I'm not going to be able to come out fast
Mm-hmm.
enough. And I really want to challenge that assumption for us, and to encourage us to experiment with it and find those little moments where, like, I can let like 4 tears out and then kind of tuck it back in, and continue on my way.
Mm-hmm.
And for those of us who really can't afford to have the big time, a day or half a day or hours of a day, or let alone like a week, or, as Rebecca Finegloss did, a whole year of not working, which I should say parenthetically, she really acknowledges her privilege in being able to do that. That's not something that most of us will be able to do, but if we can, might as well. But we don't have to go big to work with the grief process. We can give it these small opportunities and still be making some movement with it, still be working with it in a way that's useful, instead of continuing to store it in our compartments like you were describing earlier.
I just did that today, actually. This shirt that I'm wearing and this scrunchie that's in my hair both belonged to my friend Megan, who passed last summer. And this morning, when I was deciding what to wear, I just felt a little bit of tenderness and grief towards her. And I thought, oh, okay, it's time to wear this shirt. And then when I went to do my hair, I was like, oh, it's also time to wear the scrunchie. Got it. This is a wearing my grief on my body day.
Yeah. I like that you touched on that, because that is a simple thing, and it didn't, like, maybe you did have some tears come up, but you didn't describe like, and then for like an hour I couldn't face anybody because I decided to wear the scrunchie, right? Like, you made this choice and it was something that you could work with, and it was honoring your grief where you were in that time. I like too that emphasizes some of working with our grief is just honoring the person that we love who's not here anymore in space and time. It's not always on the floor, in tears with snot flying out of all your orifices, right? It can be, but there's this range, right, of different kinds of expression and honoring of the grief. Like, for instance, I like you're in line with what you're sharing. There are two bracelet cuffs that I now wear every day because they remind me of my brother. And it had been years since I wore them before he passed. But now, like, it's sort of like a thing I do. It's like, that's just honoring my person. And that's part of my grieving process too. It doesn't take any time. So
Yeah.
I really love that you brought that up.
Yeah.
I think too, like, I just want to give people another example of the quick moments. You described, taking an extra moment at the end of a shower, or, I'm picturing like listening to a particular song on your drive into work, those kinds of things. I have actually several playlists that I've made for Edward since his passing that I use in different ways. And sometimes it's just like, I can feel a little bit of something needs to come up. And so I'll just listen to one of the songs, and, maybe I'll sing with it. Maybe it's a day where that's the right kind of emoting for me. Maybe I'll just listen to it. Maybe I'll cry through the whole thing. It's a quick, it's like, I don't know, sometimes like a 4.5 minute touchstone that gives me an opportunity to be with the grief just a little bit. And depending on the day, it has a different flavor, but it's still a known place and time I can give myself.
That's so beautiful. And music has such a power to hold emotion and to bring back memories.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
music is just such a gorgeous way to weave that into an already full life.
I want to, I don't know if pause is the right way, but I want to, like, slow down in this part of the conversation long enough to also say, like, it's not for those of us who have to work and we have such limited time for our grieving, and we don't get to take, days or a week or, weeks off of our work to do the grieving. I want to emphasize that that's not an issue with any individual. That's an issue with the system that we live in.
And to really hold yourself in so much, I really think of it as fierce self-compassion. Self-compassion that is so courageous enough to acknowledge that the problem isn't the fact that you're grieving. The problem is that the system doesn't allow space for people to be human.
Doesn't support us in our grieving, which, like, we as humans are just going to do. And so it would make a little bit more sense, to me at least, for us to have cogent and useful systems for supporting our grievers built into how we run our society. And it
Mhm.
seems like, I think even, historically, early in, human civilization, even before what we think of as human civilization, we emphasized, we felt import around the loss of our people, and we began to create rituals from that experience of their body is no longer inhabited, but their body is still here. Where did they go? Will we get to be with them again? And creating these beliefs and rituals and ceremonies, and then even whole, spiritual systems to attend to that. And I actually think that's where the bulk of our religion and probably even the bulk of our culture, or our human culture, not individual cultures, but human culture, came from, was this sort of like working through what happens when one of our people is gone.
Yeah.
And it's been such a central part of our development that I think where we have arrived now, where we're really divorced from that, we're divorced from the processes of death. We're divorced from, even what it looks like or what you have to do with a body. We're divorced
Mhm.
from the processes of grieving in many ways, or it's very, very truncated. And so we've lost this really important piece of what makes us who we are. And I think we need to get that back in our systems, in our, we want to be productive. We want to create things. That's great. But if we lose our humanity in the process, then what good is it for us? I really didn't expect to go here with this topic.
That is gorgeous. That is such a gorgeous realization that death and loss and grief are foundational to all of the stories we've been told and all of the belief systems we've been raised with. And now we're so separate from it. Wow. I'm pretty blown away by that realization. Thank you.
Yeah, it has definitely been kind of rocking my understanding of us too. And especially in this dynamic where we've developed to such a degree that we now don't make enough room for ourselves. And we need to get back to that. Like we're talking about ways that you can do it individually in a system that isn't supporting us. And we also need, I think, as a species, to be getting back to some of our roots around making space for grief.
This episode is brought to you by the Center for Emotional Education and Sacramento Reiki Center, where we support full-time grievers every day. Many of our clients have tried everything and it still hasn't been enough. After our work together, they gain the tools and skills that they need to navigate their grief on their own. You can get more information at sacramentoreikicenter.com and centerforoemotionaleducation.com.
Okay, so we've talked though a little bit about like the system that we're in, and how for some of us especially that means the amount of time that we have is very small to give over to our grieving. But we can do small discrete moments of it. We can bring it into our daily life, as you described with it, as we both talked about with our current adornments. Also, some of what we're talking about here, I think it's important to just bring in some like understanding for ourselves that we as humans going through a grieving process are existing in a system that isn't necessarily supportive, and in some ways is oppositional to what we're going through. And like kind of like, just being tender with ourselves about that.
Yeah. Yeah. So tender and compassionate to ourselves.
Yeah, you said fierce self-compassion. I think
Fierce
that's
self
really,
compassion.
really important.
And also the fierce self compassion around self reflection of knowing, saying to yourself, I'm doing the best I can. I'm grieving right now.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And
Yes.
letting that allow performance to slip and to say, it's okay. I'm grieving right now. Me doing my best is not the same every day. My best looks different depending on the day. And this
Yeah.
day is the day that I'm grieving.
I really love the way you put that. Yes. Yes. And the way of talking to ourselves even about it, being with ourselves at that level.
So, shall we transition into addressing those who are privileged enough to take time, what to do with the time?
Yeah. Yes.
So, I think that if your employer offers bereavement leave, take it. If your
Yeah.
employer offers paid time off, use it. If your employer offers unpaid time off and you can afford to take unpaid time off, take it. If you have a 6-month cash savings account, just 6 months living expenses, this is the moment for that you have been saving for. Don't think that the moment's coming later. This is that time.
Yeah.
So give yourself permission to use it. So if you happen to be privileged enough to have the space to take a few weeks, a month, a few months off,
Or to just work less for a period.
yes, what would a person do? What should they do with that
Yeah.
time?
It's a really important part of the conversation, isn't it? So we talked a little bit about some of the things that you can do tucking in. And I think that's still important, even if you have a wealth of time. And so, I don't know, remembering that if you have the time, you can go big, and going big is useful and supportive, but we can also, and perhaps more easily, go small and regular and frequent, like giving ourselves that minute at the end of the shower regularly, or giving ourselves 5 extra minutes in bed in the morning regularly, anywhere where we can just collect a few minutes to allow it. And then I would say in the early days when you're able to have time, that's, if you're able to give yourself that time for however you're able to marshal it in those early days, it probably it'll just be coming out, right? The feelings will be coming up. If you're able to, you're allowing them to come up. You're sitting with them. You're making room for them. You're not squashing them down or trying to clean them up or trying to like go and do a bunch of volunteering so you don't have to be with your feelings. Right? Actually giving yourself the time. But then as we go further along, I think it becomes more and more important to schedule that time. Partly because as grief becomes more subtle, it's easier to overlook when there's a little bit of a buildup that we need to make room for. So scheduling it regularly means we're less likely to kind of get behind, if you will. And then also it can be easy to, when it comes up, kind of try to put it off because we have something, we didn't schedule it, so we're in the middle of something, or we're about to head to something, or we want to go do something, and so I'll do that later. I'll do that. I'll make sure to do it later, right? So actually scheduling the time means that we're guaranteeing that we're going to give it to ourselves. And you can schedule it by signing up for like a grief support group or grief retreat or grief sessions, like with one of us, for example. Or even if it's like setting aside time and your plan isn't necessarily to just sit and be with my grief, which is a thing you can do, but is sometimes too heavy for folks to schedule. You can schedule time to honor your loved one, schedule time to play that playlist, or to sing to them, or to light a candle, or to, I don't know, do a thing that that they would love you doing. In addition to those times where we would schedule time to give ourselves a chance to stir it up and sift through some of the grief.
Yeah, and I think that if you have the privilege of taking time off, if you have the capacity during that time off, you can acknowledge that your time off is this long, 4 weeks, for example. I'm certainly not going to be done grieving in 4 weeks. And in 4 weeks, I can find a practitioner, start establishing a care routine, start establishing my support system, and getting everything in place to be ready to go back to work or to go back to reality. So that's another scheduling that can happen.
So scheduling it and then like planning your schedule for the future. I just really love that you brought that framework in, because that can be such a great way to help you get your head around it. And then I think it's also important to, when you've secured time, or if you've been able to secure time, however much time you've been able to secure, allowing those feelings to come up when they crop up, instead of being like, oh, like, I've given myself the day off, but I really wanted to like spend it by the river and like writing poetry, and now I'm in bed crying. Like, if you can, give yourself the grace to allow that time too, right? That's the way the grief needed to look then, and you're doing it. you know, even if it wasn't what you had intended with the time that you set aside.
Oh, that's beautiful as well.
I also think it's useful to work with place as well as time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talked some about permission, giving ourselves permission, you know, kind of like stealing permission from the society, or giving it to ourselves, even if the society won't. We talked about, you know, giving ourselves some time and like ways to inhabit that time. But then I think also providing ourselves with space for grieving can also imply or include place. So for instance, you know, setting up an altar. We've talked about that at different times in this podcast, but it can be a simple thing as just like a photograph of your loved one and a flower and a stone that they might have liked, or a candle, or a couple of things that remind you of them, or a couple of things that feel like they're kind of like blessings to them. And that can be temporary, it can be long term, it can be permanent. You know, you can do altars of all kinds. And I love the idea of an altar because it really can be something that is supportive for you in having a place that is for your person, you know, and where it is all about honoring them. And then at other times, it can also be something that's very state or environment specific, you know, like I've set up altars for Edward that are just out in the woods. That was like from some things I found out in the woods, and maybe it's still there, maybe it's not, but it was something I could build at the time that was very meaningful with the time that I had in the place where I was.
Mm-hmm.
I also think about, you know, going to special or private places for your grieving. Some folks like to do that out in the woods or by the river, or I imagine in a cave, you know, but like,
Or at the gravesite.
yeah, well, yeah, special places for you and your person. But it could be even like one place that was private and became special for me was my own closet, where when the feelings were really up, I would just go in there and close the door and sit in the dark with the feelings, you know, and that was my private special place for it, you know. But yeah, a memorial space, whether it's the grave or a bench in town here for my brother, and it has a little memorial plaque on it for him, and I'll go and sit there. I do like blessings of it at certain times of year, but it is a place that any day of the week, even in the rain, which he loved, I can go and sit, and it's a place for me and Edward, you know.
That's so
And the
beautiful.
wonderful thing about a bench is it's also a place that we can share with others. So I see evidence, or I see people sitting on it sometimes from far away, and that's like a really special thing for me.
Wow, that's gorgeous. I love that.
And then also going to special places that you shared with your loved one, right? Like any place you might have hiked or camped, or where you had a particularly poignant moment together, or where you used to go a lot, or anything like that that you can revisit and it be a place for you and them again. So yeah, ways to work with place as well that we can give ourselves. Do you have any other ideas around place? I know you like to go in nature a lot.
I'm a big nature person. I definitely like to go in nature. I think there's also, I have in the past employed the strategy of going to a healing space that lasts
Yeah.
more than an hour or more than a day. So, for example, after my mother passed, I dropped out of grad school and I bought a one-way flight to India, and I attended a yoga teacher training in India. And being in a space that was conducive to me learning how to heal, even though it wasn't focused on grief, was an incredibly powerful place and space to give myself the ability to heal. And so that can look like a retreat on Reiki, or a retreat on yoga, or a retreat on Qigong, or just anything that resonates with you that makes you feel more whole. It can be a weekend making art camping. And it doesn't have to be grief centric. It can be something that you just genuinely love and enjoy doing. And giving yourself time to do that and knowing that that will be very supportive to the grieving process.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah. Really, really love that idea. So useful. And I know, like, I have a fellow griever I've supported some who, it's a kind of a complicated story, and like we don't know, I don't always encourage people to make big moves in the wake of a big loss, but for some people that is what's right for them at their, as they're processing their grief. This person actually moved to another town as part of their grieving process, and
Mhm.
they're having the sense of just being in another town, still working on it, not trying to ignore it, has given them more space, more ability to access it in ways that are working for them.
Yeah, especially if you live with the person.
Yeah.
Sometimes being in that same house can be excruciating because they're
Yeah.
not there anymore and you feel their vacancy so much. So having a new start in that way can be really helpful. And I've seen a lot of people really benefit from, I know people who even, they owned their house and the person they were living with passed, and they went and put their house for rent and went and rented a different place. So they were still breaking even because they were getting their rental income and then
Mm-hmm,
paying their
mm-hmm.
rent. So even if you're a homeowner, there's options here. You don't have to stay. If it feels wrong to be there without them, you can take a break from being there.
In preparing for this conversation, one of the things we wanted to talk about was this sort of like the difference between using our time and our space and our permission to isolate versus some intentional, like, I think cocooning was how you were
Mhm.
putting it. Do you want to speak to that just a little bit?
Yeah, so I think of cocoon. When I think of the word cocoon, I think of like a nest, like a bird's nest, or like this sacred enclosure that's holding you. So cocooning will pay really close attention to your nutrition, will pay really close attention to moving your body every day, to letting your feelings out, to doing what you love. And that can be alone. And that can be with small groups of people. It can be really overwhelming to try to be around people you don't know very well in that period of cocooning. So I want to encourage, if you have the support of people who you know very well, to really just gravitate to being around them. Whereas isolating, I think of deteriorating mental health due to loneliness and isolation. So isolating can be like watching lots of television or scrolling lots of content online in an effort to distract from and not nurture the self. So the isolation would be poor attention to nutrition and perhaps not eating enough, or perhaps eating a lot of foods that are not good for you, that you know are going to make you feel bad. So I think of isolation as this avoidance and aloneness, whereas cocooning is this aloneness and small circlesness, but it has this energy of nurture.
I love the way you described the cocoon. Yeah, I think that of that softness and that sort of temporary soft enclosure, if you will,
Mhm.
and not like, I think too the way that you're describing it really brings in the distinction, the way isolation can be like aloneness, even guardedness against being with people, but it can also be kind of isolating from our own process or isolating from our own feelings, or like repressing and suppressing instead of engaging while we're in the cocoon. Some of it, there's like oh gosh, there's too many concepts I want to talk about at once, but there's that sense of when we're first sort of like thrown into the ocean of grieving, there's so much, there can be so much destabilization and so much just trying to like in survival, kind of grappling with what's happened. Am I going to be okay? Is this okay? What's going on? And so like a natural kind of leaning back or removal from additional activation, either being around other people or being around a bunch of other people or being in, society and the bells and whistles of society. And part of that is like just the intensity that we're dealing with, right? There's so much coming up for us that any other like stimulus can seem like it's too much. And then some of that is too, is like we're going through something that's so profound and potent and crushing for some of us, that there's this sense that no one else is going to get it. No one else is going to get it. No one else can help me, or I'm just going to bring people down if I'm around them. And so there can be this additional tendency to move away. And I think it's important to remember that that's natural, it's normal, it's often quite temporary, and we can help ourselves by leaning into this idea of cocooning and nurturing in that space rather than just moving away, isolating, trying to get away from in that space.
Yeah.
It reminds me too of the concept of the way grief is kind of an invisible concussion. Like no one actually came and bonked us on the head, but operationally inside, there's quite a number of similarities between acute grief and having an actual concussion. And it can be so easy for us and for others around us to see us as whole, like I'm still here. I don't have a big knot on my head. And so it can be more challenging to afford ourselves the support and the tenderness and the cocooning and the softness and the nurturing that we need in that time, because we look normal and we aren't the ones who died. So recognizing that that's part of what we're going through, especially in that acute period of grief or whenever the grief is more acute, can help us, I think, sort of afford ourselves a little more nurturing or a little more understanding or a little more time and space and slowness. Like I don't look like it, but I'm going through the invisible concussion of grief, and so my brain is just doing what it needs to do. And so it helps me to move a little slower or to give myself a little more time, a little more space for a period while we're moving through that, working with it.
Yeah, that's so powerful and beautiful. So, if you do have the resources and the privilege to take the space to grieve, this is your full permission to take it, to use those resources, to dip into that savings account. And when you do so, to spend your time making sure that you are being so nurtured.
Hey, thanks for listening to Full-Time Grievers. Please like this video, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you find out when we release the next episode. If you have thoughts or questions about what we shared, please leave them in the comments below. And if this episode made you think of someone, we invite you to send it to them. They could probably use it. Also, don't forget to get your free Receiving Support While Grieving guide in the show notes below.